Of course, the house and the company will be mine. She can have the toys." Maxwell's words echoed across the mahogany-paneled room, each syllable dripping with self-satisfied arrogance. My hands clenched in my lap, nails digging into my palms, but I kept my posture straight. Around us, the room erupted in laughter, as if my life's work was nothing more than a punchline in one of Maxwell's jokes. I sat there in my simple gray dress, feeling the cool leather of the chair under me, silently counting the seconds until I could leave. My name is Evelyn Parker, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 12 years, I've been the driving force behind our family's real estate and construction firm, Parker Development Group, based in Denver, Colorado. While Maxwell spent his 20s traveling the world, sipping cocktails in exotic resorts and chasing the approval of distant relatives, I had been navigating the chaos of construction sites, negotiating contracts, and managing a workforce that often numbered in the hundreds. Yet here I was, sitting in front of the family as if none of it mattered. Aunt Lorraine always said Evelyn was Daddy's little doll collector, but Maxwell gets business. I bit back the urge to snap, feeling the metallic taste of blood at the corner of my tongue. The man who had never stepped onto a single job site, who thought a blueprint was a decorative pattern, who believed profit margins were something you scribble in the margins of a notebook. I kept my expression calm, my hands folded neatly, because I had learned early that arguing with family was like shouting into a hurricane. Wasted effort. Maxwell straightened his silk tie, the color screaming for attention. Evelyn can keep playing with her little collections while I handled the serious responsibilities. Dad always said the company needed someone with strong leadership. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, cleared his throat. The elderly man had a soft demeanor, but the weight in his eyes told me he was about to change everything. My chest tightened with anticipation. Actually, his voice cut through the room's laughter like a cold blade. Everyone froze. Maxwell's triumphant grin faltered, confusion replacing confidence in the blink of an eye. A spark of something thrilling and dangerous flickered in my chest. I had spent years being dismissed, overlooked, treated as the family's background character. But something told me the tables were about to turn in ways none of them could imagine. Growing up as the youngest Parker meant learning early that your opinion rarely mattered. My father, Jonathan Parker, had built the company from nothing, starting with a beat-up pickup truck, a toolbox, and a dream. My mother passed away when I was just 11, leaving me to navigate the chaos of construction sites with no guide, no shield. Maxwell, 5 years older, and always the golden child, was the star. Football hero in high school, university graduate with decent grades, always charming everyone he met. Meanwhile, I learned concrete ratios, foundation importance, zoning laws, and how to spot errors in project schedules before disaster struck. Dad always said, "Evelyn's numbers mind is sharp. She keeps me organized." To him, I was more than a daughter. I was a partner in keeping the family legacy alive, even if no one else realized it. When Maxwell announced his soul-searching trip to Europe for 6 months, I stepped into the chaos of running multi-million-dollar contracts alone. Projects threatened to collapse, employees considered leaving, and clients were on the verge of canceling deals. I solved every problem, kept the company afloat, and ensured the business ran without a hitch, all while Maxwell was chasing sunsets across the Mediterranean. And now, sitting here, listening to him mocking me, I realized I was moments away from finally seeing the truth emerge. Mr. Thompson shuffled his papers, the subtle smile in his eyes promising that the family's laughter might soon be silenced. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe a little easier. Something was about to change. Something irreversible. The night before the will reading, I barely slept. The clock ticked relentlessly on my bedroom wall, and each sound reminded me of the years I had spent pouring my life into Dad's company. 12 years! 12 years of missed birthdays, skipped vacations, and weekends spent at dusty construction sites rather than cafes or beaches with friends. I remembered being 22, fresh out of college, when Dad had his first heart scare. Maxwell had just come back from a sailing trip in Greece, sunburnt and broke, still bragging about networking with wealthy entrepreneurs. I was the one who rushed Dad to the hospital, who signed the paperwork, who held his hand when he said, "Evie, the company needs you now more than ever." And I answered that call without hesitation. I threw myself into the business, studying contracts late into the night, driving hours to supervise builds, fighting with stubborn city inspectors, and keeping the payroll running. Employees twice my age looked at me skeptically in those early days, whispering, "What does this kid know?" But slowly, they learned. They saw me on site in the pouring rain, hard hat on, boots covered in mud, walking the framework of half-built homes with a clipboard in hand. One of the oldest foremen, Rick, once said, "You've got grit, Evelyn. Reminds me of your dad in the early years." That meant more to me than any applause Maxwell ever got. But the family never acknowledged it. At Thanksgiving dinners, Dad would casually mention, "Evelyn saved a project from falling through," and everyone would politely nod before steering the conversation back to Maxwell's latest travel story. I sometimes wondered if invisibility was my superpower. But what hurt most wasn't the silence of others, it was the dismissal from Maxwell himself. I'll never forget the day he barged into the office, fresh from his sabbatical, tossing his leather jacket on the desk. "Evie," he'd said with that smirk, "I'll take over now. You've done, well, the grunt work, but leadership? That's my role." I had laughed bitterly then. Leadership? You mean drinking lattes in Milan while I negotiated million-dollar contracts? But my voice didn't matter. He strutted into meetings, spoke over me, and charmed clients with half-truths while I quietly picked up the pieces. Still, through it all, Dad saw me. He never said it in front of Maxwell, but late at night, over black coffee in the office, he'd murmur, "You've carried this family on your back, Evie. Don't think I don't know it." I clung to those words. They were my armor when Maxwell belittled me, when relatives snickered, when I felt like I was drowning under responsibility. And yet, deep down, fear gnawed at me. What if Dad, despite everything, had left the company to Maxwell? What if all my years of sacrifice were brushed aside because tradition dictates the eldest son inherits the crown? That fear kept me awake the night before the will reading. My heart pounded, imagining Maxwell's smug grin as he signed ownership papers, leaving me with hollow memories of my work. By morning, I forced myself into composure. I chose a navy blue suit, professional, sharp, unyielding. As I stood in front of the mirror, I whispered to myself, "No matter what happens, they'll know I fought for this." When I arrived at the lawyer's office, the Parker family circus was already in full swing. Aunts gossiping in corners, cousins exchanging sly smiles, and Maxwell, always the star, holding court with his charming grin and loud stories. He looked at me, raising his glass of champagne in mock salute. "Enjoy the show, little sister. By tonight, the Parker Empire will have a king." I didn't respond. I couldn't waste breath on him anymore. Instead, I focused on the man behind the mahogany desk, Mr. Thompson. His glasses perched low on his nose, his hands steady as he shuffled through the thick stack of papers. The room quieted as he began to speak. My pulse quickened, and the weight of 12 years pressed down on me like a tidal wave. Every sacrifice, every late night, every fight to keep the company alive, all of it hung in the balance. And then Mr. Thompson's first words shattered the silence. This will is not what many of you are expecting. Gasps rippled through the room. Maxwell's grin faltered, but only for a moment. My breath caught in my throat. For the first time, I felt the ground shifting beneath us all.
The heavy silence in Mr. Thompson's office pressed down on us like a storm waiting to break. Outside, the Denver skyline gleamed under the afternoon sun, but inside, it felt like the air had grown thick, weighted with generations of Parker pride and expectation. Maxwell leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs as though he were already the crowned heir. His grin returned quickly, that smug curve of lips that had haunted me my entire life. "Not what we're expecting," he chuckled. "Old man Thompson, let's not drag this out. Just tell them what we all know. Dad left the house and the company to me." Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses slowly, the way he always did before delivering news that would cut deeper than a knife. He cleared his throat, eyes scanning the room before settling on Maxwell. "Your father, Jonathan Parker, left very specific instructions, and as executor of his estate, it is my duty to honor them exactly as he wished." I sat perfectly still, though my pulse hammered in my throat. My palms were damp, hidden discreetly in my lap. Mr. Thompson unfolded the crisp document and began to read. "To my son, Maxwell Parker, you were born into privilege and gifted with charm, but charm without responsibility is a hollow trait. Over the years, you have failed to show the discipline required to carry forward this family's legacy. Therefore, I leave you not the company, nor the estate, but instead a financial trust to support your personal endeavors. It will provide you enough to live comfortably, but no more than that." The room erupted. Aunts gasped, cousins whispered furiously, and I could almost hear the collective sound of jaws dropping. Maxwell's smirk disintegrated. His eyes darted from Mr. Thompson to me, then back again. What are you talking about?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "That company is mine. Everyone knows it." Mr. Thompson's gaze was unyielding. Jonathan Parker was very clear. Maxwell's fists clenched. "This is ridiculous. He would never." Mr. Thompson raised a hand, silencing him. Then with deliberate calm, he continued reading. "To my daughter, Evelyn Parker, you have stood by my side when no one else did. You carried the company through storms, bore the weight of sacrifice, and proved yourself to be not only capable, but indispensable. You are the future of Parker Development Group. Therefore, I leave you full ownership of the company, as well as the family home. With one condition." My breath caught. Condition? The room leaned in, hungry for more. Mr. Thompson's voice grew firm. "The company and estate are yours, Evelyn, provided you continue to run Parker Development with the same dedication you have always shown. You are not permitted to sell the company or dissolve it for personal gain. If you fail to uphold this, the ownership will be transferred to the employees' trust fund your father established." A murmur swept through the room. The employees? Dad had thought of everything. I sat frozen, torn between shock and an overwhelming wave of gratitude. All those nights of doubt, the years of silence and invisibility, he had seen me all along. Maxwell shot up from his chair, his face flushed crimson. No, this is wrong. Evelyn doesn't deserve this. She's just... Just what? My voice finally cut through, calm but sharp as glass. Just the one who kept the company alive while you partied across Europe? Just the one who stood beside Dad when his heart failed? Just the one who sacrificed everything while you wasted your chances? The room was dead silent. For once, Maxwell had no clever retort. He stood there, fists trembling, breathing heavy like a cornered animal. Mr. Thompson folded the will neatly and placed it back on the desk. Jonathan Parker's wishes are final. The matter is closed. I looked at Maxwell, his fury radiating like heat waves, and in that moment I understood. This wasn't over. The inheritance had been decided, but the war was only beginning.
The second Maxwell stormed out of Mr. Thompson's office, it felt like the calm before a hurricane had passed, leaving a tempest in its wake. Aunt Linda's shaky voice tried to reason with him, but he didn't hear her. His face was red, veins bulging at his temple, his hands shaking, not from effort, but from rage and disbelief. I walked past the stunned relatives, my folder clutched tightly against my chest, like armor against the storm of whispers and sidelong glances. The click of my heels against the polished marble floor felt like an echo of every silent victory I had won over the years. I wasn't invisible anymore. Outside, the Portland wind whipped against my coat as I stepped into the street. I let out a slow, steadying breath. The city moved on around me, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded in that mahogany-paneled room. But inside, a fire burned that I had never allowed myself to feel so openly. This was more than triumph. It was vindication. And yet, it came with a cost. Maxwell, humiliated but far from defeated, was already plotting. I had seen that in his eyes. Raw, relentless ambition fueled by the sting of having been bested. While our family whispered about my triumph, he was already calculating. How could he twist this to his advantage? How could he undermine the very thing he had lost to me? By the time I returned to the Timbermir Brewing offices, the tension was palpable. Employees who had once treated me like the quiet daughter of the Parker legacy now greeted me with respectful nods and wide-eyed admiration. Contracts that had been stalled were suddenly being pushed forward, and suppliers sent updated quotes with a subtle acknowledgement of my ownership. It was intoxicating. Yet the real challenge was coming. Maxwell would not quietly accept his reduced role in this world. 2 days later, the first signs appeared. Confidential documents went missing from the company's servers. A trusted contractor called with sudden, suspicious complaints about payment delays. Emails intended for my eyes only had been intercepted, containing subtle threats from competitors who seemed unusually well-informed. Maxwell was testing the waters, probing for weaknesses. I didn't panic. I had spent a decade building not only the company, but a foundation of meticulous documentation, a network of loyal employees, and a keen understanding of the construction business that no charm or silver tongue could replicate. Every action Maxwell took, every attempt to destabilize me, I anticipated. I organized a staff meeting. Standing at the head of the polished conference table, I looked around at the faces of people who had worked alongside me, the team that had seen my sweat and tireless nights. "I know some of you have questions," I said calmly. "There will be challenges, but we have everything we need to keep Timbermir Brewing strong. We've weathered storms before, and this is just another one." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Maxwell's real power, I realized, was not in what he had taken for granted, but in his ability to manipulate perception. That had always been his tool: charm, charisma, and the illusion of competence. But perception didn't matter in the face of proven results, and I had those results in spades. Over the following weeks, I tightened security protocols, reviewed every financial report, and personally oversaw critical projects. Maxwell's attempts to interfere grew bolder. A rival contractor called with last-minute bids, expecting me to falter. A key client hinted at dissatisfaction, trying to create doubt. But every step of the way, I countered with evidence, strategy, and calm authority. And with each success, the employee's loyalty deepened, while Maxwell's credibility outside the family eroded. Rumors of his entitlement and lack of real experience spread through Portland's business circles like wildfire. By the time he realized the full weight of his losses, the city's perception of him had shifted irreversibly. Yet, even as I basked in the quiet triumph, a small, cold thought lingered at the back of my mind. This wasn't over. Maxwell's anger was a force of nature, unpredictable and relentless. He had been humbled, yes, but he had not been defeated in spirit. The real battle would come not from the legal documents, but from the way he tried to claw his way back. I returned to my office one late evening, overlooking the city lights reflecting off the Willamette River. I let the silence wrap around me, savoring the moment. This was my company, my legacy, my victory. But victory, I knew, was only the beginning. And as I prepared for the inevitable storm that Maxwell would bring, I realized that I was ready. More than ready. I had spent years building not only Timbermir Brewing, but the woman I had become, resilient, strategic, and unyielding. The fallout was inevitable. The consequences were coming. And when they arrived, Maxwell would learn, finally, what it truly meant to underestimate someone who had been quietly winning all along. It had been nearly 2 months since the will reading, and Maxwell's presence in my life had shifted from casual arrogance to a simmering, calculated threat. I knew he wouldn't accept defeat easily, and every small ripple of unrest in the company reminded me that his next move could strike at any moment. The morning began like any other. Timbermir Brewing hummed with activity as contractors, architects, and engineers moved through the offices discussing new sustainable housing projects that I had designed and brought to fruition. My desk, now meticulously organized with blueprints, financial reports, and project schedules, reflected the empire I had quietly built while the family assumed I was just the bookkeeper. Then came the call. "Miss Parker, this is Eric Lang from Dominion Capital. You may want to see this immediately." I frowned, grabbing the tablet he sent. My heart skipped as I saw the contents. A series of contracts that Maxwell had signed in my name, or rather forged to appear authorized, claiming ownership of Timbermir assets he had no legal right to control. The audacity! I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of fury and cold calculation settle over me. This wasn't just a petty attempt to undermine me. This was a full-blown, orchestrated attack. But Maxwell had underestimated one crucial thing. I had proof, meticulous documentation, and a team loyal enough to back me no matter what. By noon, I had called an emergency board meeting. The conference room filled with the most trusted employees, those who had worked alongside me, seen the crises I had solved, and understood the company's true heartbeat. "We have a problem," I began, placing the forged contracts on the table. "Someone has attempted to manipulate Timbermir Brewing's ownership records. They believe intimidation and trickery can undo 5 years of hard work. But they're wrong, and we're going to prove it." Eyes widened. Murmurs swept the room. I knew my team expected me to falter under pressure, but falter was a luxury I had never afforded myself. By late afternoon, I had scheduled an emergency meeting with Mr. Thompson, my father's old lawyer, to verify the legality of every contract and ensure our documentation was airtight. Maxwell, confident in his little schemes, had no idea that the very people he sought to deceive were standing solidly behind me. When Maxwell arrived at the office expecting confrontation and chaos, he found calm authority instead. I met him in the lobby, my expression composed, my voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "Maxwell," I said, keeping my tone measured, "I believe you've made a mistake. Care to explain these?" I gestured toward the forged contracts. His face twisted from indignation to desperation. "I was just trying to secure our family legacy. I thought—" "I thought what?"
That you could erase 5 years of proven management with a few forged signatures? He faltered. His confidence crumbled as I presented the chain of documentation. Emails, meeting records, project approvals, and financial statements that tracked every single decision I had made. Each piece of evidence highlighted Maxwell's absence and my indispensable leadership. By the time I finished, Maxwell was pale, voice trembling. This isn't fair," he whispered. "No, Maxwell," I said, stepping closer. "What's unfair is that you thought hard work, sacrifice, and skill could be replaced by charm and entitlement. You assumed you were the rightful heir because of your birth, not because of your actions. That's the mistake." The silence that followed was suffocating. Employees stared, contractors held their breath, and even the receptionist peeked over her desk. Maxwell's hands shook at his sides. The golden boy, who had always relied on inheritance and privilege, finally confronted the reality that nothing, no charm, no family name, no fleeting popularity could override merit and dedication. I began, then stopped. There was nothing left to say. I handed the contracts to Mr. Thompson. "Please ensure these fraudulent documents are filed with the authorities and publicly noted as void. Maxwell needs to understand the consequences of his actions." Maxwell slumped into the nearest chair, defeated. For the first time in his life, he had no easy charm, no smooth words, no entitlement to protect him. He was alone, stripped of illusions, staring at the sister he had mocked for years, the sister who had quietly built the empire he assumed would be his. And in that silence, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about anger. It wasn't about humiliation. True victory was proving that patience, dedication, and competence could not be stolen or overshadowed. Maxwell had tried to undermine me, but all he had done was highlight my strength. I turned toward the window overlooking the new development site and let the morning sunlight wash over me. Timbermir Brewing was mine, not because of a name or a legacy, but because of every choice I had made, every crisis I had solved, and every sleepless night I had endured. Maxwell would learn this lesson slowly, painfully, and perhaps never forgive it. But I didn't need his forgiveness. I had everything I had ever earned, and I was just getting started.
The weeks that followed Maxwell's failed scheme unfolded like a lesson in poetic justice. Timbermir Brewing thrived under my leadership in ways even I hadn't fully anticipated. Contracts I had painstakingly secured continued to mature. Our sustainable housing projects drew attention from city officials and investors alike, and the company's reputation grew stronger with every passing day. The office, once tense with family whispers and doubts, now resonated with focused energy. Maxwell, on the other hand, became a cautionary tale. His failed attempt to manipulate documents, combined with his inability to prove any real contribution to the business, had left him exposed and humiliated. Rumors spread quickly through Portland's business circles about the dramatic reversal at Timbermir, and it wasn't long before he was forced to take a job far below the expectations he had once imagined. Seeing him struggle with financial responsibility and workplace respect was a strange blend of satisfaction and reflection. I didn't relish his hardship, but it was undeniably the natural consequence of a lifetime of entitlement without effort. One morning, as I walked into the newly expanded Timbermir headquarters, I paused for a moment at the reception. A fresh bouquet of lilies sat on the desk, and my assistant greeted me with a smile that said more than words ever could. The company had grown by over 40% since I had assumed full control 5 years ago, and the fourth major development project, our largest sustainable housing complex yet, was entering its final stages. I felt a quiet sense of pride, a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with money or titles, but with the knowledge that every blueprint, every contract, every painstaking negotiation was a direct result of my dedication. Mr. Harrison, my father's old lawyer, had become a frequent presence at the office, not just as legal counsel, but as a mentor and witness to my growth. One afternoon, as we reviewed the expansion plan for the Patterson Heights redevelopment, he looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Miss Parker, you've done more than just inherit Timbermir Brewing. You've transformed it. Your father would be immensely proud." His words carried the weight of decades of knowledge about my father and his vision for the company. I nodded quietly, letting a small smile touch my lips. After all, the journey had never been about proving my worth to my family. It had been about proving it to myself. Then came the most unexpected moment. Maxwell requested a meeting. He walked into my office, a shadow of the man who had once strutted through the family gatherings with overconfidence. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there was an unmistakable weariness in his eyes. For a moment, I studied him in silence, remembering the smug arrogance, the condescending jokes, and the countless times he had belittled me. I need a job," he said quietly. The words hung in the air, fragile and desperate. He was no longer the golden boy. He was a man stripped of illusions, asking for help from the sister he had spent years mocking. I looked at him, my mind weighing every emotion: anger, satisfaction, and a strange hint of empathy. For a long moment, I considered offering him a position, a chance at redemption. But then I remembered every slight, every dismissal, every moment I had been made to feel invisible. I shook my head. "I'm sorry," I said firmly. "We're not hiring." He nodded, swallowing hard. There was no protest, no pleading. He understood, finally, that he had brought this upon himself. As he left my office, I realized that this was the final closure I had been waiting for. Not revenge in the conventional sense, but the quiet, unshakable satisfaction of knowing that diligence, intelligence, and perseverance had triumphed over arrogance and entitlement. Days turned into weeks, and Timbermir continued to flourish. I signed the contracts for our 5th expansion, each signature a reminder that the empire was truly mine, not because of a last name, not because of inheritance, but because of years of hard, uncompromising work. The office buzzed with activity, laughter, and creativity, a stark contrast to the stifling, dismissive atmosphere of past family gatherings. And in the quiet moments, when the city lights twinkled across the office windows, I allowed myself to reflect. Every late night, every challenge, every underestimated decision had led to this moment. Maxwell's failures, while satisfying, were secondary to the primary truth: I had built this. I had earned it. And for the first time in my life, I felt the freedom and power of standing entirely on my own merit. My father's voice echoed in memory, soft but resolute. "You understand this business better than anyone." Those words, spoken during his final days, had guided me through uncertainty, doubt, and struggle. And now, in the triumph of Timbermir Brewing's success and the quiet defeat of Maxwell, I finally understood the depth of his foresight. I smiled, taking a final look at the office I had shaped, the team I had nurtured, and the empire I had fought for. The past, with all its mockery, doubt, and challenge, had led me here, to a place of certainty, respect, and fulfillment. Sometimes the most satisfying victories are the ones that unfold quietly, not with drama or spectacle, but with the unmistakable proof that the underestimated, the diligent, and the determined have the power to control their own destiny. And that is exactly what I had done.